Marvel's Spider-Man had the best traversal in gaming since Mario Odyssey and Hollow Knight, and the only game that's come close to topping it since its release was Halo Infinite. Able to combine momentum, style and rhythm all wrapped up in one of the most obvious applications for this type of movement by making a AAA Spider-Man game with millions of dollars behind it. Now, it wasn't perfect. There wasn't a lot of intricacy to the swinging, as it was essentially just holding right trigger and pressing forward while tapping X. So all the heavy lifting was being done on screen rather than giving that power to the player. But you'd be hard pressed to find a person who was using fast travel to get around Manhattan instead of swinging everywhere. And now we have the direct sequel, and any good sequel doesn't just wallow in what made the first game good. Even if Insomniac damn near perfected it the first time, you don't just keep using it over and over because that's how something gets stale. So Insomniac added something to the formula, a gliding mechanic. It's an exciting addition and one that makes sense on paper, but in practice ends up hurting the traversal way more than it helps. So let's start with why the web wings were a good idea to add to the game. Well, that's easy. With the expansion of the open world to include Brooklyn and Queens, you needed some way for Spider-Man to get across the river. Open world games are my favourite genre, but the one unforgivable error so many developers make is locking segments of the world behind funnels, which are connecting areas that you have to travel through to reach other more sprawling areas. This was recently done in games like Hogwarts Legacy and Tears of the Kingdom, and I was worried that Spider-Man 2 would force me to swing under the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges. But the web wings mean I can just glide across the East River with no problem, and when you use the wind tunnels, that speeds up the process and gives you an exhilarating feeling. I really do appreciate that Insomniac wrote a web connecting code, meaning you can't just swing off the clouds like your Doflamingo or something, so I see the need for the web wings. But here's the thing, they kinda suck and are an antithesis to everything I like about getting around New York in the Spider-Man games. So what do I like about Spider-Man's traversal? I know before that I said Spider-Man's swinging didn't have a lot of intricacy, and didn't give the player the feeling of mastering a complex system, but one thing it did give the player was an immense amount of control over the swinging. The crescendos of the swing and the speed of the dives didn't take control away from the player, meaning Spider-Man couldn't do some visually impressive swinging that would only be possible if it was animated by the developers. Instead, Insomniac sacrificed that visual flair to give complete control to the player, and I applaud them for that. The swinging also requires constant interaction from the player. You need to angle the swing in order to not slam into the next skyscraper and lose your speed, as well as releasing the triggers at the apex of the swing so you don't lose your momentum. This is infinitely more effective than other games where moving around only consists of moving a directional stick and holding/tapping the sprint button. But even games like that are more effective than pressing one button and have the game move forward for you, and take all that control away from the player. And therein lies the problem with the gliding. It's non-interactable. It's so jarring to go from constantly engaging with the swinging just to dropping into a wind tunnel and passively waiting for Spider-Man to glide through to the other end. In fact, it's worse than jarring, it's straight up boring. It's worsened by the fact that you have minimal directional input while gliding. As Spider-Man is moving so fast in these sections, you can't angle him correctly unless you're heading down a completely straight street. If you've played the Unidentified Target Drone side mission, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that trying to get stable control over Spider-Man in these sections is abysmal. Taking corners trying to follow the drone will send you careening off course. Hell, the controls for the gliding were so poorly thought out that they were inverted by default. What kind of madman has inverted controls on by default? And with the high speed of the gliding combined with the minimal control and the fact that the game is set in, New York, good luck trying to get around anywhere without a wind tunnel. It's like Insomniac saw how badly the web wings were messing up the flow of traversal and just had to put in designated spots for them to be used. And to get back to the original reason for its inclusion in getting across the East River, I much prefer leaping from sails, skimming across the surface and then leaping to another boat. Sure, it's slower, but it's a more interactive way of getting across, and games should have interactivity at every possible moment. But why does the gliding in Spider-Man 2 suck when games like Zelda and Horizon do it so well? Because the appeal of gliding in those games is that I had to earn it. I had to scale the mountain before I could leap off, and that feeling of travelling all that distance that took you minutes to climb in seconds is an unmatched feeling. And the same logic applies to leaps of faith in Assassin's Creed. It's about earning the right to glide. Spider-Man 2 is incapable of giving us that because Ascension is so easy thanks to swinging and wall crawling. So when we glide, it ceases to be a reward and becomes just another way to get around. And the problem with that is that Spider-Man 2 already has one of the best ways to get around in the industry.